It was an unusually quiet afternoon at the veterans' retirement home on a crisp autumn day. Sunlight filtered softly through time-worn windows, revealing walls adorned with faded black and white photographs, images of courageous faces and long-forgotten moments, each frozen in time. The silence was interrupted by a presence that few had ever expected: former President Donald Trump. In a move that defied expectations, he walked through the quiet halls without a single camera or reporter trailing his steps. His purpose was clear, though its meaning remained elusive even to him: to honor the unspoken promises of the past and to awaken buried secrets. As Trump strolled down the long, narrow corridor, his polished shoes echoed against the old linoleum floor. He paused by the portraits of veterans whose eyes seemed to follow him, a silent jury of the ages judging both his arrival and his quest. There was an undeniable aura of solemnity in the place, as if each veteran, now confined to memories and whispered regrets, had been waiting for a day like this. Some of the elderly men and women, their faces marked by both hardship and resilience, glanced his way. Their eyes betrayed a mixture of curiosity and guarded caution, for promises made long ago were often as heavy as the burdens they carried. But Trump was not there for political theatrics or a media spectacle. His eyes searched the room purposefully, intent on finding one man in particular. At the far end of a dimly lit corridor, behind a battered wooden door with a barely legible nameplate, Monroe sat Lieutenant Colonel Jack Monroe. Seated by the window, Jack was a relic of another era, his silver hair haloed by a soft glow of fading afternoon light, his face carved by time, sorrow, and the heavy cost of memories. In his frail, trembling hands rested an old yellowed envelope that had somehow survived the passage of 50 long years. It was a letter that had been sealed away, its contents both a promise and a burden. Trump's measured footsteps brought him to that door, where he gently rapped on the wood. "Lieutenant Colonel Monroe," he called softly, his voice carrying more weight than any speech. Jack, deep in his own world of memories, barely stirred. "If you're here to give another long-winded speech," he replied in a hoarse, tired tone, "I've heard enough of those to last a lifetime." With the careful precision of a man who knew the value of every word, Trump pulled out a chair and sat opposite Jack. His eyes, sharp yet kind, focused on the old envelope resting on Jack's knee. "I'm not here to talk politics or deliver a message," Trump said quietly. "I'm here because of that letter." For a long moment, silence stretched between them. Jack's hand gripped the envelope more tightly, as if to shield it from a fate he had both dreaded and longed for. "What do you know about it?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper, laden with decades of regret. Trump leaned in closer. "You've held on to it for 50 years. You never opened it, never sought to know what truth might lie within those fragile folds of paper. And yet, we can't let the past remain sealed forever." The old man's eyes drifted to the window, where a small group of veterans played chess under the sprawling branches of an ancient oak tree. Their game was slow and deliberate, a reminder of battles fought not on foreign fields, but in the quiet war against time and memory. Jack exhaled a long, sorrowful sigh. "I was afraid," he murmured, "afraid of what it might say, afraid of reopening wounds that have never quite healed. Every night I see their faces. The friends who never returned, the promises we made and failed to keep." Trump nodded slowly, his tone gentle yet insistent. Carrying silence can never lessen the weight of regret. Sometimes the hardest truth is the one we're most afraid to confront. After a prolonged pause, Jack carefully slid the envelope from his grasp. His fingers trembled as he broke the seal, a seal that had held his doubts and sorrows captive for half a century. Inside lay a neatly folded piece of paper, its edges brittle with age. Though the ink had faded, the words were unmistakable. A farewell from Captain David Collins, a soldier whose fate Jack had once believed sealed in death. But at the bottom of the letter, one line forced everyone to question the certainty of that long-held belief. If someone finds this letter, it means I am still alive. I was captured. If you can, please find me. Trump's breath caught in his throat as he scanned the words. His eyes met Jack's, searching for answers in the silence between them. "Do you believe it?" he asked softly. Jack's face, etched with shock and guilt, crumpled as memories rushed back. "They told me he was dead. I believed it even when my heart screamed otherwise. For 50 years I carried the weight of that loss. If David is still alive, then I left him behind." His voice cracked under the strain of years of buried pain. Reaching out, Trump placed a steadying hand on Jack's shoulder. "The worst mistake is not in making a mistake, but in failing to act when it matters most. Perhaps it's time we try to right this wrong." At that moment, a soft knock at the door interrupted their intimate exchange. A young nurse entered. A woman with a neat ponytail and an expression that mixed gentle curiosity with determination. "Excuse me," she said quietly. "I couldn't help but overhear. You mentioned David Collins?" Her eyes, full of both compassion and quiet resolve, met theirs. "Just yesterday, we admitted a new patient who kept repeating that name." A spark of recognition passed between Trump and Jack. They rose as one, their hearts quickening in anticipation. With the nurse leading the way, they followed a narrow corridor lined with rooms that each echoed with the stories of old battles, personal triumphs, and unspoken grief. The walls bore silent witness to the weight of history, each room a sanctuary of memories too profound for words. At the final door of the hall, the nurse paused, her gentle hand pushing it open with a tender persistence. Inside, under the weak glow of an overhead lamp, lay a man who seemed as fragile as the letter in Jack's hand. His hair was a cloud of snow-white strands, his skin marked by the ravages of time and hardship. He stared blankly at the ceiling, as if lost in a world that was both distant and achingly close. Jack's heart pounded as he stepped forward, his voice trembling. "David?" The word carried a weight that spanned half a century. The man blinked slowly, and as recognition softened his vacant gaze, his lips quivered. "Jack? Is it really you?" In that moment, decades of isolation and loss melted away, replaced by a connection so deep that words nearly failed them both. Silence reigned for several heartbeats. A silence heavy with unsaid apologies, unresolved grief, and unfulfilled promises. Tears welled in both their eyes. Jack's mind raced back to the final moments on the battlefield, the desperate hope that had accompanied him into retirement, and the haunting memory of a friend lost too soon. For 50 years he had lived with the crushing guilt of leaving behind a man who might have needed him more than he ever knew. Donald Trump watched from the doorway, stepping back respectfully. This was a reunion that belonged only to Jack and David. A moment for the ghosts of the past to be exorcised. Yet in his heart, Trump understood that this was not simply an emotional reckoning between two veterans. This was the beginning of a quest to confront an injustice that spanned decades, to redeem lost honor, and to recover not only names buried in time, but also the very essence of what it meant to be a soldier, a friend, and a brother. Inside the quiet room, as the golden light of the setting sun played upon their faces, David began to speak, his voice weak yet determined. "I never imagined that you would still remember me," he said, each word measured, each syllable heavy with the weight of memory. Jack's eyes filled with tears as he reached out, grasping David's frail hand. "How could I forget you?" he replied, voice cracking with emotion. "Every night for 50 years, I saw your face in my dreams, heard your voice in the wind. I thought that letting the past lie silent was the only way to ease the pain." David offered a smile mingled with sorrow and forgiveness. "War takes more than it gives, Jack. We both made choices that we've had to live with. I wrote that letter not out of spite, but as a desperate plea for a promise to be kept. Before our last mission, we swore something sacred to each other. If any of us ever went missing, the rest would bring him home, no matter the cost." He paused, the silence thickening with the echoes of memories long suppressed. "But there are 3 men from our unit who never returned. Their graves remain unknown, their families left waiting in silence for answers that have long since faded into myth." Jack's hands clenched tightly around the letter as the memories of that fateful day flooded back. The battlefield, the deafening roar of gunfire, the acrid smell of smoke, and the terrible realization that some promises were too heavy to keep came rushing forth. "I believed I was doing what was right," he whispered, tears streaming down his face. "I never thought that the silence would become such a burden." Trump's eyes, which had witnessed his fair share of controversies and hard truths, shone with an unexpected empathy. "We all have moments we wish we could change," he said softly, "but the path forward is paved with the courage to face those moments head-on. If David is still here, then perhaps it is time to bring back not just him, but the honor of every promise we once made." Their conversation was suddenly interrupted by a soft knock at the door once more. Nurse Amy, the young woman who had first brought them the news, stepped forward. "I'm sorry to intrude," she said, her tone both respectful and determined, "but I think I might have another piece to this puzzle. We admitted a new patient yesterday, a man who kept repeating the name David Collins, as if it were a mantra, a lifeline." David's eyes softened at the mention of his name, and he reached out weakly for Amy's hand. "Thank you," he murmured, "for listening to these ghosts of the past." The nurse smiled gently, a blend of youthful optimism and compassion lighting her features. "There's a veterans organization dedicated to finding missing soldiers," she explained. "I've seen it work wonders before. If you'd like, I can make some calls, find some leads, someone who might help us piece together the final parts of your story." Trump, who had been silently absorbing every word, now stepped forward with a quiet resolve. "We cannot let the silence of the past bury these names any longer," he declared. "It's time we honor every promise, every sacrifice. We'll bring them all home." Within days, a plan was set in motion. Trump, Jack, David, and Nurse Amy began collaborating with military officials and veteran organizations to form a dedicated recovery team. The goal was nothing less than to locate the long-missing members of their unit, men whose names were now etched into the very fabric of regret and honor. A worn-out map, its creases and stains bearing testimony to the years of handling and hope, pointed toward the jungles of Vietnam, a region scarred by conflict and long-forgotten battles. The marked location was where their unit had taken final orders, a site now overgrown and reclaimed by nature. The recovery team, composed of experts and former soldiers, embarked on a solemn journey. The flight was heavy with anticipation and silence. There were no idle words, no nervous laughter. There was only the shared understanding that they were not merely retracing old steps, but were seeking to honor promises that had been deferred for far too long. Hours later, the team arrived at an overgrown clearing deep within the jungles of Vietnam. The humid air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying vegetation. As they disembarked, each step felt like a step back into a past where every moment was lived in the shadow of imminent danger. Trump, despite his high-profile background, moved with a quiet determination that spoke volumes about the weight of the mission. They reached a shallow depression in the ground, overgrown with wild grass and tangled vines. This place, hidden away from the world, was a forgotten battlefield. Jack knelt beside the ground, his fingers lightly brushing against the soil as memories of chaos and heartbreak surged forth. "This is where we made our final stand," he whispered, each word trembling with both pain and hope. The soil, damp and heavy with the legacy of countless fallen souls, was about to reveal its long-held secrets. Working slowly and reverently, the team began to excavate the site. With every careful shovel of earth removed, layers of history were unveiled. Among the debris and remnants of uniforms faded by time, a glint of metal caught Jack's eye. A dog tag, partially buried but still legible. He held it up, his voice breaking as he read the engraved name, James Collins. Shock and sorrow mingled in his eyes. "It's him," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "My dear friend and brother in arms." David sank to his knees beside Jack, his hands shaking as he took in the discovery. "James, I waited so long for this moment," he said softly, tracing the engraved letters as if trying to commit them to memory. "My brother, you waited, and today we finally found you." His voice was a fragile whisper, laden with years of unspoken regret and the desperate hope that one day justice would be served. Trump's voice, resonant and commanding, broke through the somber silence. "They fought for their country, for honor and for each other. Today, we ensure that their sacrifice is remembered and that their promises are fulfilled." The recovery mission was no longer just about recovering remains, it was about acknowledging the deep scars left by war and the need to mend them with remembrance and reverence. In the midst of their careful excavation, a young veteran on the team named Mark, whose eyes burned with a mixture of respect and determination, called out, "I found something else." He held up a battered silver lighter, its surface dulled by the passage of time, but still inscribed with words that carried a haunting echo, "Return or die trying." Jack's eyes widened in disbelief as he recognized the familiar object. "No, it cannot be," he murmured, voice trembling. "That lighter, it was mine. I once carried it into battle as a reminder of my promise." The room fell into a deep silence, every person present acutely aware that the lighter was not merely an object, but a symbol of a promise made on the battlefield, a promise to never leave a brother behind. David's face, etched with sorrow and compassion, moved closer to Jack. "You did not abandon anyone, Jack," he said with gentle certainty. "I know what happened on that day. I know the choices we all had to make. My brother chose what he believed was right, and we must honor that choice." His voice, though soft, resonated with the strength of a man who had endured decades of loss. Trump placed a steady hand on Jack's shoulder, his tone calm yet resolute. "Heroism often comes without explanation. Today, we honor the bravery of every soldier who fought, who sacrificed, and who made promises that time almost forgot." The discovery of James Collins' dog tag and the lighter reignited the embers of memories long kept at bay. That evening, as the recovery team set up a temporary camp near the excavation site, Jack and David sat together under the vast expanse of a star-studded sky. The cool night air, punctuated by the distant calls of nocturnal creatures, provided a serene backdrop for their reunion. They spoke in hushed tones, their conversation weaving through the intricacies of a past filled with heroism and regret. Jack recalled the final moments of that fateful day. "We were under heavy fire," he said, voice low and filled with the weight of those memories. "I remember how the smoke choked us, how the sound of enemy fire mixed with the cries of fallen comrades. In the chaos, I saw you moving forward, defiant against all odds, and then I lost you in the confusion." David's eyes, reflecting the glimmer of distant memories, softened. "I was found and hidden by a family in a village far from the battlefield. They risked everything to save me, to give me a chance to live. For 3 years I was hidden away, a ghost in a land that had once been our enemy's domain." His voice, though frail, carried the conviction of someone who had survived not just physical wounds, but the deeper, invisible scars of war. As the night wore on, Trump, who had been quietly observing the conversation from a respectful distance, stepped forward. "You both have carried burdens that no man should bear alone," he said, his tone a blend of personal resolve and public responsibility. "What you are about to do, retracing these painful memories, is more than an act of remembrance. It's a commitment to every soldier who has ever been forgotten, every promise left unfulfilled." The recovery team worked diligently over the following days. With every excavation, they uncovered relics that told the story of a battalion of brave souls, a story of valor, sacrifice, and the inescapable bonds of brotherhood. Uniform buttons, faded letters, and even a small scrap of cloth bearing the insignia of their unit emerged from the earth. Each artifact was carefully documented, each memory revived with respectful attention. It became clear that the mission was as much about healing old wounds as it was about piecing together the physical remnants of a bygone era. Nurse Amy became an unexpected linchpin in this emotional odyssey. Balancing her youth with the wisdom of compassion, she spent long hours listening to the veterans' recollections, arranging interviews with surviving comrades, and making phone calls to veteran organizations both in the United States and abroad. "There is so much we can still learn," she remarked one evening as she sorted through old photographs and letters. "So many stories that need to be told, so many voices that must be heard." Over cups of lukewarm coffee in a makeshift mess hall, Trump, Jack, and David sat down with several veterans who had known them in their younger days. They recounted tales of camaraderie, battles fought under an unyielding sun, and moments of quiet bravery that transcended the brutality of war. Every shared story was a reminder that behind every casualty, behind every unresolved promise, lay a lifetime of memories that could not be measured in medals or monuments. For Jack, the recovery mission became a personal quest, a journey not only to reclaim the names lost in the chaos of battle, but also to finally lay his own guilt to rest. "For 50 years I've carried a burden too heavy to bear," he confessed one evening to a small circle of fellow veterans. "I have wondered every night if I had done enough, if I could have reached out and saved a friend, or if my silence had condemned him to an existence in shadow." His voice was raw and sincere, each word an act of catharsis. David, too, confronted memories he had long tried to bury. "I was saved by a Vietnamese family," he said, in a quiet, trembling voice during one of the campfire discussions. "They risked their lives to hide me, to give me hope when all seemed lost. For years, I lived in the silence of that hidden life, haunted by the fact that my family, especially my younger brother, was never found." His admission opened up a fresh wound, a wound that demanded healing and recognition. Trump's role in this journey was no longer merely that of a visitor or an observer. He had become an advocate for remembrance and reconciliation, a man who believed that the past, no matter how painful, must be confronted if true healing was to occur. "We can't let the legacy of these brave souls fade into obscurity," he told the group one morning, his voice resolute. "Every story, every name is a testament to the courage and sacrifice that defines us as a nation." As the team prepared for the final phase of the mission, the return journey to bring the recovered remains and memories back to American soil, a palpable sense of solemn duty filled the air. The remnants of their fallen comrades, once scattered in the vast jungles of Vietnam, were being gathered with reverence and care. A casket was prepared, adorned with American flags and the dignified notes of taps echoing softly in the background. The moment was heavy with both grief and hope. A farewell to the physical remains, but also a promise that the memory of those lost would endure. Jack, whose hands had trembled at every discovery, found himself facing the enormity of his lifelong burden. Standing before the casket of his fallen friend, he whispered, "I failed you for so long, James. I carried that guilt as if it were a part of me, but today, with your name finally restored to honor, I hope to find some measure of forgiveness. Even for myself." His voice was thick with emotion, and even as he spoke, tears glistened in the eyes of those gathered. David approached his brother's casket with the measured steps of a man who had seen too much loss. His eyes, still holding a spark of the soldier he once was, softened as he placed a small, weathered photo of his younger brother beside the flag. "You were more than just a soldier," he murmured. "You were my family, my friend, a beacon of hope in a time of darkness." In that quiet moment, the room was filled with the collective sigh of a generation that had finally begun to find solace in the act of remembrance. Trump, who had seen his share of controversies and public battles, now embraced a different kind of challenge, one of quiet dignity and personal responsibility. "Today we have done more than recover lost names," he said softly, as he observed the solemn memorial service at the airport. "We have given hope to those who still wait in silence. We have honored promises that were made and almost forgotten. Let this be a reminder. No sacrifice shall be left unremembered, and no promise will ever fade into oblivion." The journey back to American soil was not without its moments of reflection. On the airplane, as the city lights twinkled far below, Jack closed his eyes and allowed the memories to wash over him. A montage of battlefield camaraderie, the vibrant laughter of young soldiers, and the quiet despair that followed when a friend was lost. In that reflective silence, he finally felt the stirrings of forgiveness, a slow, tentative forgiveness for himself and for the ghosts of the past. In the days that followed, as news of the mission spread, the story captured the hearts of many. Families of veterans, soldiers still in service, and everyday citizens found solace in the narrative of lost promises being redeemed. Memorial services were held, and every word of the story of Trump's unexpected visit, Jack's painful confession, David's harrowing journey of survival, and the promise that had been honored at last, resonated with a deep, unspoken truth, that no matter how long time passes, the bonds forged in the fires of war remain unbreakable. The memorial service, held in a grand hall draped in the somber hues of remembrance, was a culmination of the emotional journey that had begun with a single letter. Families, veterans, and officials gathered as the casket was carried in a slow, reverent procession. The soft strains of a lone bugle playing taps filled the air, each note echoing the sacrifices of the past. Trump, standing off to one side, watched as the ceremony unfolded. Knowing that this was more than a moment of farewell, it was the beginning of a new chapter in a long overdue reconciliation with history. Jack, still trembling with emotion, stepped forward to speak on behalf of all who had carried the burden of lost promises. "For 50 long years," he began, his voice wavering yet resolute, "I have carried the weight of guilt and regret. I thought that by keeping silent, by burying the pain, I could keep the memory of our sacrifices alive. But today, as we honor each name and every promise, I realize that silence only deepens the scars." His eyes met those of the audience, an audience composed of veterans, family members, and citizens, each face reflecting the shared pain and the promise of healing. David, supported by his own steadfast resolve and the strength drawn from years of silent endurance, added, "We have made a promise to each other, one that transcends time and borders. I ask that you join me in remembering not just the names on these dog tags or the faces in these photographs, but the very spirit of brotherhood that carried us through the darkest moments of our lives. His voice, though soft, carried the weight of a lifetime of experience, a call to honor the bonds that no distance or time could sever. Nurse Amy, whose compassion had been a beacon throughout the mission, also spoke, a testament to the fact that healing was not confined to the battlefields, but extended to every life touched by loss. In every forgotten name, in every silent promise, there is a story, she said gently. Today, we celebrate those stories. We remember the sacrifices made, the promises kept, and the hope that binds us all. As the ceremony drew to a close and the final notes of taps faded into the evening air, Trump stepped forward one last time. I came here today as an unexpected visitor, driven by a quest to right a wrong, he said, his voice carrying both humility and determination. But it is you, each of you, who have shown that even the deepest scars can be healed by remembrance and compassion. Let us not allow these stories to be forgotten, for in every act of remembrance lies the strength to forge a better tomorrow. The story of that day, of a retired veteran's letter, of a promise made and nearly lost, and of a reunion that defied the boundaries of time, soon spread far beyond the quiet corridors of the retirement home. It became a symbol, a rallying cry for all those who believed that the sacrifices of the past must never be relegated to silence. Newspapers and television networks covered the story with a reverence that transcended political divisions, focusing on the universal themes of friendship, honor, and redemption. In towns and cities across the nation, memorials were erected, not just in stone but in the hearts of citizens who had been reminded of the deep bonds forged in times of adversity. Veterans organizations, emboldened by the discovery, began to re-examine old records, determined to unearth the stories of those who had been lost to time. The promise that had been made on that fateful day was now being kept in ways that resonated with communities far and wide. A promise to bring every forgotten soul back into the light of remembrance. For Jack, the journey was personal and transformative. No longer was he the man haunted by the silence of regret. He had embraced the courage to face the past and in doing so had found a way to forgive himself. In quiet moments, as he sat by the window of the retirement home and gazed at the photographs on the walls, he allowed himself to smile at the memories of days when life was simpler, even as the shadows of loss lingered in the corners of his mind. David, too, found solace in the act of remembrance. The reunion with Jack had been cathartic, a final chapter in a saga of survival that spanned continents and decades. With the support of his family, including his gentle grandson who had asked about the heroism of his lost uncle, David began to open up about his own experiences. His story, once shrouded in secrecy and pain, was now shared openly, offering hope to others who had endured the trauma of war. As for Trump, the journey had redefined his perspective in ways that transcended his public persona. The mission, born out of an unexpected visit to a quiet retirement home, had become a personal crusade, a quest to honor the truth of the past, to seek out forgotten promises, and to remind the world that even in the midst of political storms, there could be moments of profound human connection. He departed that day with a renewed understanding that the legacy of those who had served was not measured by headlines or controversies, but by the enduring bonds of loyalty and the unbreakable spirit of remembrance. In the years that followed, memorial services were held annually in honor of the recovered heroes. A special ceremony was established, one that included readings of the old letter, tributes to the fallen, and moments of silence that allowed every heart to reflect on the cost of war and the value of redemption. The story of that quiet afternoon became a cherished narrative, a reminder that every promise, however long forgotten, deserved to be fulfilled. And so, the legacy of that day lived on, a legacy of forgiveness, of courage, and of the unyielding commitment to remember those who had given everything. It was a legacy that inspired communities, reawakened old wounds only to heal them with compassion, and proved that even the most deeply buried secrets could be brought into the light of day with a single act of remembrance. In the end, the unopened letter that had sparked so much sorrow and regret was no longer a symbol of failure or lost hope. It had transformed into a beacon, a guide for those willing to face the past, to mend broken bonds, and to honor the memory of every soldier who had once stood shoulder to shoulder with his comrades in arms. The story is one that leaves us all with a profound question. What would you do if faced with the choice to open a letter sealed for decades? Would you dare to confront the memories of a painful past, or would you allow the silence to persist, fearful of what the truth might reveal? For those who choose to seek the truth, the reward is not merely the unveiling of a secret, but the healing of old wounds and the redemption of a promise that binds us all.